Hey, thanks so much for joining us online for Revive. Tonight you're going to hear a message from our very own Zack Fitzgerald.
All right, so tonight is a lesson that I'm teaching on take your grave clothes off. And I'm so excited that you're viewing this on YouTube. But even more, I would love for you, and Ron would love for you to come and join us live. We have it every Wednesday night at 6:30 in the fellowship hall here at 50 Stanford Avenue. So if you can't come live, please continue to watch us here on YouTube, and we hope that you enjoy tonight's lesson. In 1995, a band called DC Talk released an album called Jesus Freaks. So let's just go ahead and say none of y'all were born, right? None of y'all. That's wild. But DC Talk released an album called Jesus Freaks, and on that album was this song entitled, What If I Stumble? And the chorus, I'm not going to sing it for you because I don't want y'all to leave. But the chorus says, what if I stumble? What if I fall? What if I lose my step and I make fools of us all? Will the love continue when my walk becomes a crawl? What if I stumble? What if I fall? And this is DC Talk, and a couple of them may look familiar to you. One of them is Toby Mac. Y'all at least know who Toby Mac is? Okay. And the other guy is the lead singer for the Newsboys. He's the black guy. I don't remember his name. I think it's Michael. I'm not sure. Michael Tate. I just know Toby Mac. So, but these guys released this album, and they released this song on the album, and I truly believe that chorus is the thought process of a lot of Christians. The what if I stumble and what if I fall? Because sometimes, actually all the time, Christians, we're put under so much pressure. We're put under pressure by our parents, by our friends, by other Christians. We're put under pressure by the church. And let's just be real, we're put under pressure by a world that is as far from Christ as it's ever been. And they expect us to hold a standard that they know nothing about. And that pressure gets to be too much sometimes. And sometimes our walk becomes a crawl. And if we're not careful, our crawl will become no movement at all. And when that happens, we go back to what's comfortable. We go back to who we were before we met Christ. And I'm not saying that we lose our salvation. Don't read between the lines. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that we go back to what's comfortable, the life where there's no pressure, where there's no standards. And then, right there, we pick up our grave clothes. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight, is the concept of take your grave clothes off. I was in class. It was around October or November of last year. It was in a drug interdiction class. And they bring in this guy named Sean Pardesi. And to y'all, that name means absolutely nothing. But in the police world, in the interdiction world, Sean Pardesi belongs on Mount Rushmore. I mean, he is one of those guys. And whenever you bring in someone of this magnitude to teach a class, the entire southeastern region of the United States, they started sending vendors to sell their product. And Sean, whenever he would get done talking about a topic, he would let us different vendors come up and try and sell their products. And I remember one, I'll never forget this. This guy gets up there with a jar and a hound dog. Okay, you can't make this up. And so I'm looking at him, I'm like, dude, why do you have a mason jar and copper? Like, are we Fox and the Hound in this, or what are we doing here? And he gets up and he starts his talk and he goes, how many of y'all got dementia patients in your area? And of course we're all like, yeah. He's like, now keep your hands up. How many of you, keep in mind, he's got a hound dog healing at his leg here. And he goes, how many of y'all have those dementia patients walk off when it comes to search and rescue? I'm like, yeah, actually I had one last week. He said, this jar will fix it all. I'm like, okay, you lost me. He says, all you got to do is go up to that dementia patient's family and say, let me get a sock. I said, a sock? He says, you stick this sock in this tube and it's airtight and it keeps the scent in. And when the dementia patient walks off, you pop the top and let the dog smell the sock and he tracks right to him. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So, but anyways, like this dude's dead serious. And I look across the room and my dad is over in the corner. And he's around the sheriff, the chief, some captains. Like, in other words, he's around the top dogs of the department. And me being me, I get my phone out. And I shot my dad a text. All I said was, yo, let me get a sock. And so my dad, and I don't know if you've ever seen my dad like try and hide the laugh that he's having, but it's like a full body laugh. Like his shoulders are chuckling, like he's rolling. And it's in a serious moment because these people pay big money to be here. And so now the sheriff and the chief, they're all wanting to know what my dad's laughing at, and he just takes his phone out and shows them that I'm asking for a sock because he's old. And so they lost it. But anyways, I tell you all that story to tell you this. Fabrics hold scent. fabrics hold scent, and the sense of smell is one of the strongest of our five senses. I've got a couple, when I say couple, I've got five facts about smell. They're kind of cool just to kind of get our feet wet here. The first one is people can detect at least 1 trillion distinct scents. Okay, that's a lot. Like it's with a T, not a B or an M, like trillion is a lot. The next is you can actually smell fear and disgust. The article that I was reading in between like all the scientific jargon that I knew nothing about, it said that when you're scared or when you have disgust, your body puts off a certain odor in your sweat, and you can actually smell fear and disgust. The third one here is women have a better sense of smell than men. Guys, let me talk to you real quick, okay? All right, guys, when you go on a date, okay, when you go on a date, and like you've been working all day, or you've been at school all day, and you're like, man, I showered this morning. Yeah, I showered. Okay, because women can smell better than men, okay? So they're going to know that you haven't showered. Like, put some deodorant on, do her a favor, okay? The fourth one here is dogs have nearly 44 times more scent cells than humans. As a police officer, I love this because canines can smell dope in cars. One of the canine officers in our department broke it down for me like this. He said, now, Zach, whenever we bake a cake, and I'm saying we, like loosely, I can barely make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, okay? So whenever y'all that have been gifted with the ability to bake, when y'all bake a cake, and you put all the different ingredients in it, right? The eggs, the flour, the milk, all those active ingredients, when you put them in the cake and you put it in the oven and you pull it out, we smell the finished product. Like the strawberry cake, the coconut cake, chocolate, whatever it is you've made, you smell the finished product. But the dog still smells each ingredient separately. It can still smell the eggs and the milk and the flour all inside this finished cake because their senses of smell are that strong. And the fifth one and final one is people can actually smell with 65% accuracy after a year, while visual recall is about 50% after 3 months. So guys, the sense of smell is incredibly strong. And you're probably sitting there thinking right now, Zach, what in the world does this course that happened before I was even born, what does that have to do with a sock that dementia patients give to a canine and the sense of smell? Like, what does all that have to do together? How does that work together? And I'm glad you asked. Because tonight we're going to look at the concept of taking our grave clothes off. Okay? We're going to look at the idea of Lazarus being raised from the dead, and then we're going to look at the idea of the prodigal son. So let's go ahead and dive in. Our first scripture here is going to be John chapter 11, verses 38 through 44. Here we go. It says, "Then Jesus, angry in himself, again came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. 'Remove the stone,' Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, 'Lord, he's already been decaying. It's been 4 days.'" Right here, guys, I love the King James Version. If you've got a King James Version Bible, it says, "Lord, he stinketh." Okay, she's saying, God, he's been dead a while. He's decaying. He smells terrible. And then Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this, so that they may believe you sent me." After he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, bound hand and foot, with linen strips, and with his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said, "Loose him and let him go." In other words, Jesus said, "Take his grave clothes off." Guys, I don't know if y'all have ever had this experience. I hope and pray that you haven't. Not the coming back to life part. Bear with me. Whenever someone dies and they find the body, guys, dead bodies smell bad. They just smell bad. Let me just go ahead and tell you from personal experience. And the clothes that are on the bodies smell just as bad. Okay, and you can remove the clothes from the dead body and put them in 2 different rooms, and the clothes still smell like the body. And it would be absolutely crazy for someone who is alive to go and put those clothes on and walk around with them on, because dead things don't belong on live bodies. But how many of you know that that's exactly what we do in our Christian walk so many times? We're alive in Christ. We have this salvation moment. We're living for him. We're fired up for Jesus, and Satan throws something in our path, and we get scared, and we run, and we go right back to who we were before we ever met Christ, and we put our grave clothes right back on. So tonight, we're going to be looking at the idea of the prodigal son. With that foundation of the grave clothes, we're going to move right in to the prodigal son. And the scriptures will be on the screen. We're going to be in Luke chapter 15 here. verses 11 through 32. We're going to break it down. We're not going to hit them all at one time. But the Bible tells us this in Luke chapter 15, verse 11. He also said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that I have coming to me. So he distributed the assets to them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all that he had and traveled to a distant country, where he squandered his estate in foolish living. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he had nothing. All right, let's go ahead and break down the first part of this. Guys, our first point is we fall. Guys, why do we go back to our grave clothes? The first point tonight, if you're looking on your sheets, is we fall. In the very first part of this text, we see that the son goes to his father, and let me just go ahead and put it in simple terms. The son looked at his dad and said, Dad, I wish you were dead. That's essentially what he's saying is, Dad, I wish you were dead. Go ahead and give me my inheritance right now, which whatever you're going to give me when you die, I want to go ahead and have it right now. So the dad gives it to his son. The son goes to the Jewish Walmart, buys some big boy pants, and he sets off and he's gone. So and the Bible tells us that he squandered his estate in foolish living. In the original text, in the Greek, that says homeboy lived it up. Okay? He went and squandered absolutely everything and rebelled. He became someone that his father had raised him not to be. He had completely forgotten how he was raised. Man, how practical is this? If you were in here a few short weeks ago, you heard my testimony. And yeah, I was 11 years old, but I had a really rough patch. I went to counseling weekly. I had family members pouring into my life, trying to get me to snap out of what I was in. But I was literally rebellion, and it scares me to death to think about who I would have been if this has happened when I was 15, 16, or 17 years old. And guys, when something like that happens, it can be so difficult to climb out of the rock or the hole that our sin has created for us. It can be so difficult, and our sin, what Satan likes to do whenever we sin, whenever we mess up, he likes to isolate us first. And then in that isolation, we become ashamed, and then we become angry. Think about your own life. If you've ever gone through a bad breakup or a death or something of that nature, and when someone just comes to help you, my answer was always, I just want to be left alone. Just let me be alone. I just want to be by myself. Man, it's in that isolation that Satan works. The Bible tells us there's strength in numbers. Guys, if we're not careful, when we fall, we put our grave clothes back on. The second point tonight is we fear. We fear. The Bible continues. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one would give them any. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands. Guys, tonight the second point is we fear. We fear. The next part of this text tells us that this Jewish man was so broke that he was feeding pigs. Now, if you don't know much about Jewish history or Jewish customs, this does not go hand in hand. Jews and pigs do not mix because the Jewish people saw pigs as unclean. So they couldn't eat them, they couldn't be around them. And for this man, this Jewish boy to be saying, I want to feed these pigs, but not only feed them, I want to eat the slop that they're eating, that is what we call rock bottom. This Jewish boy, the prodigal son, finds himself at absolute rock bottom. And if you're in here tonight and you're rock bottom or you're not, one day you will be. And let me tell you something, the only way you get out of rock bottom is to realize that Jesus Christ is the rock that is at the bottom, and on Christ, a solid rock you can stand. So this young boy, he sits there, he says, I'm at rock bottom, and then he remembers, man, but my father's slaves, they have it better than this. Man, yeah, I can't go back to dad and say, hey, let me be your son, but I can go back and say, let me be one of your slaves. How many times do we do this? Like, man, when I was in trouble, like, you remember the kick in the gum story, you know, when I had to play that whole scenario in my head before I go and talk to my dad? Like, so many times we get in trouble and we say, man, I'm going to be confronted with this, so let me go ahead and play out the conversation in my head before I ever get there. That's what he's doing right here. He's saying, you know what, I can go home and I can tell my dad that I've messed up, and he'll take me back as a slave. He won't accept me as a son, but he'll take me back as a slave. And so many times we do that with God. Like, his love is dependent on our actions. But yet we forget that Jesus, whenever they spoke this earth into existence, Jesus knew that he was going to have to die for us. So he already loves us that much to know before we ever put breath in Adam's lungs, he's going to have to die for us. And then Jesus puts on flesh, comes to this earth, dies a horrific death, and 3 days later he rises so that we can one day be in heaven with him. His love is not dependent on our actions. If it was, we'd all be in hell tonight. So the son, in fear, he says, you know what, I'm going to go home. And I'm going to tell my dad that I've messed up. And maybe he'll take me back as his slave. Guys, if we're not careful, when we fall, we put grave clothes on. When we fear, we put grave clothes on. And finally tonight, we'll see that whenever we forget, we put grave clothes on. As the text comes to an end, it says this. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father told his slaves, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Guys, this parable comes to a close. The son is still off in the distance. And I kind of picture this. He's walking down the road, looking at his feet, maybe kicking a rock, and playing this whole scene in his head over and over and over again. And then he looks up, and the dad is right in front of him, embracing him. And the son looks at him, and he gets out his words. Dad, I've messed up. Let me be a slave. And then the father cuts him off right there and says, go get the robe, get the ring, get the sandals. Let's have a party because my son is back. You see, the son in his sin, in all of his wild living, forgot that he was his father's son. He forgot that he was his father's son, but throughout it all, the father never once forgot that the prodigal was, in fact, his son. And he never stopped looking for him from the front porch. In the same way that his son left, he knew that one day he was going to come back and he wasn't going to stop looking for him. And so now the son is back. Now the son's back, and the father says, despite it all, despite everything, despite the son telling the father, I wish you were dead, despite the son wasting all of his money on foolish living, despite feeding pigs, which was extremely against his background and his upbringing, despite wanting to be a slave, despite it all, the father says, you are still my son. I still love you. Let's throw a party. And guys, let me tell you something tonight. Someone needs to hear this. You cannot out-sin the cross of Christ. If you could, Jesus would still be in the grave. Is that a license to sin? Absolutely not. But it is a license to come before God and say, God, I have screwed up. I need forgiveness. You see, sometimes we get the gospel and religion twisted. You see, religion says, I screwed up, my dad is going to be so mad at me. And the gospel says, I screwed up, let me call my dad. Right here, the son said, my dad is going to be so mad at me. He was following religion, but the gospel says, let me call my dad. And you see, when we forget, we pick up our grave clothes. And guys, my faith suffers when I forget. My faith suffers when I forget. Faith looks back at everything God has done and rejoices. So that tomorrow, when grief happens, when next week, when something happens next month, next year, whatever it is, I can look back and say, God has gotten me through it before, and I know He's going to get me through it again. Guys, never forget. Tonight is the night that we stop forgetting. As we come to a close tonight, I think about Peter. You see, when we first meet Peter, when Jesus first calls Peter, Peter's fishing. Jesus walks up to Peter, you know the story. And he says, hey Peter, why don't you drop your nets and follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Or you can just keep doing your thing, whatever you want to do. And the Bible tells us that immediately Peter drops his nets and follows Jesus. And so for 3 years, Peter was with Jesus. For 3 years, Peter was with Jesus. Peter watched Jesus feed the 5,000 men and their wives and kids. Peter watched Jesus heal people. He watched blind people see. He watched lame people walk. Peter saw it all. Peter was there when Jesus walked on water. Heck, Peter even walked out to Jesus on the water. Peter was there. Peter was there in the upper room when Jesus said, one of you will betray me. And Peter said, Lord, I will never betray you. And then Judas walks out of the room. Peter was there. And then Peter's at the fire. And we know what happens. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And so then Jesus is crucified. He's buried. And Peter's scared. Remember I said that our sin isolates us. And it makes us ashamed. And it makes us angry. And that's exactly what happens to Peter. And so then Jesus rises from the dead. And he walks out and he's looking for his disciples. And where does he find Peter? He finds him fishing again. You say, Zach, what are you saying? I'm telling you that Peter put his grave clothes back on. You see, whenever Peter had his salvation moment, he was fishing. Jesus called him out of that way of life. But then a tragedy happens, and Peter's scared because Peter messed up. And he goes back to what was comfortable, and he goes back to fishing. He picked up his grave clothes and put them back on. And Jesus stands on the shore, looking at Peter about 100 yards off, the Bible tells us. And he looks at Peter and he says, hey, why don't you throw your net on the right side because you're not catching any fish. And Peter throws his nets on the right side, and they catch a mess of fish that they can't even get in the boat. And Peter, realizing that it's Jesus, jumps out of the boat and swims 100 yards to Jesus. Guys, I believe in tonight in here, there's people that need to take their grave clothes off. Maybe you need to have your Peter and Jesus moment. This altar's going to be open whenever the band comes up. Secondly, maybe you're in here tonight and you're like, Zach, I don't know what you're talking about, grave clothes and Lazarus and the prodigal son. I don't get it. Maybe you don't get it because you've never had your salvation experience. You've never had your salvation moment. So dead clothes are still on a dead body. You see, my Bible tells me that Jesus stands at the door and knocks. Jesus isn't on heaven's SWAT team. He's not kicking your door in. It says he stands at the door and knocks. And whoever opens the door, he will come in. You see, Satan is telling you right now that you've got to clean up your house before you can let Jesus come in. You've got to clear your search history. You've got to hide the swear jar. You've got to pick up the beer bottles that are scattered all over your life and throw them away before Jesus will come in. But in fact, Jesus says, just open the door and I will take care of all that. Guys, tonight, if you need salvation, if you need Jesus, whenever we close, there's going to be leaders all over this room. If you need to know about how to get this relationship with this man we call Jesus, man, pull one of us aside. We'll take you into a room. We'll take you off to the side, and we will walk you through the salvation experience. We'll tell you how you can meet Jesus for the first time. Guys, as the band comes up, if you can't tell by now, I'm no preacher. I don't really understand a lot of the big words that preachers use sometimes. I didn't go through seminary. I don't have theology and eschatology. I didn't have all those ologies. I had criminology, and I had psychology and sociology. So I don't really know all the other ologies. But let me give you an example that I hope will resonate. Let me get this out of the way so Ashley can do her thing. Whenever you mess up, when I say mess up, whenever you break the law, you go before a judge, right? Whether it be speeding, or whether it be, God forbid, murder or burglary or some of the things, you go before a judge. And you stand before the judge, and they read off to you what you have done wrong. And then he looks at you and says, how do you plead? And you can either say guilty or you can say not guilty. And if you say not guilty, they stack all the evidence against you. And then it's a fight, literally, for your life to see if you're guilty or not guilty. And my Bible tells me that there's a day coming that it says it's appointed man wants to die and then face judgment. So that tells me that one day I'm going to die, and I'm going to stand before God, and I'm going to be judged. I'm going to stand before a holy and righteous judge who does not make any mistakes. And he's going to look at me and say, Zack Fitzgerald, how do you plead? Now, I can't plead not guilty because I have sinned and I have messed up in ways far unimaginable. But I also can't plead guilty because I'm going to get to boldly look at God and say, God, I plead your blood. Because there was a day in my life in 2017 when I accepted your Son as my Savior. There was a time in my life when your blood covered me, and thank God it has covered me ever since. Guys, let me ask you tonight, if you were to die right now, how would you plead? Would you plead guilty, or would you plead the blood?